capabilities and functions don't determine the value of a person. This is where you start to run into problems, Andrew, philosophically. This is where I believe you fall into a moral and ethical slippery slope. And this is the same justification people used, for instance, Nazi Germany, to wipe people off the face of the earth. Millions and millions of people have lost their lives because of this sort of logical argumentation, this rationality. Hello, my name is Jeremy Ueberroth. I'm a pastor at Emmaus Road Reformed Baptist Church, and we were recently featured in an article in a Colorado College campus, the newspaper called The Catalyst, on our protesting outside of their campus. And so I'd like to take a brief moment here and walk through the article line by line, because I really do believe it's important on the issues that are being addressed and how we as Christians ought to approach it. Now, I do recognize that not all Christians are created equal per se, in the sense that not all Christians hold the same position on this. We do indeed hold an abolitionist position. And what I mean by abolition is we would like to see abortion ended once and for all. We definitely do not hold to a incrementalist perspective where we believe that over time, through incremental legislation, that abortion should be ended. At no point in time should we ever endorse abortion at any stage and at any level. And so that's our particular position. So I'll be addressing this article from that understanding. So let's dive right in here to the article. So as you can see here, this article was released on October 28th, 2021. It was written by Andrew Hoffman. And so I don't know if we have ever had the pleasure of interviewing Andrew on the campus. We usually go right on an intersection right there in between the campus and the community center, and try to catch students as they're coming through to interview them on this issue. And so as you can see here, we hold a sign. We have a number of different signs that we use, but our sign says, "Abortion is murder, change our minds." And this article seeks to address not only our message, but also our modality, what we are actually doing and whether or not it's effective. So let's take a look at that. I'll try to do my best here to make it legible. So as you can see, this is an opinion piece, again, by Andrew Hoffman. And interesting, I'd like to note something really quick. I have to give kudos to the photographer, Eric Ingram here. Although we did not get a chance to speak to him directly, we did see him shooting photos, which we thought was pretty funny. He wouldn't talk to us. He just wanted to take pictures of us outside. But this picture, man, I tell you what, the pictures say 1,000 words. When I went back and saw the video footage of this, I'm like, we didn't even talk to this woman. You know, she just walks by us. She came by for a brief moment, and Eric got quite the photo. It speaks volumes, and I believe that it doesn't necessarily fairly represent what's truly happening. But as journalism goes, that's the way it is. So let's take a look here at the article. So he says, every Wednesday on the sidewalks outside of the Hybel Community Center, a group of Colorado Spring locals have a small protest in support of End Abortion Now, a Baptist pro-life organization. Now, on that note, yes, it is an organization that was founded by a Reformed Baptist, but it is not a Baptist-only organization. I want to make sure that we're aware of that there are many denominations representative of our particular movement to end abortion as part of the mission in our coalition. So there are many representative denominations. It's not Baptist alone. He says here, wow, everything they are doing is perfectly legal. I still take issue with the practice, and I will examine both the practical and theoretical flaws with these demonstrations. My issue with the Hybel protesters are twofold. Firstly, I disagree with the actual pro-life argument. So we'll interact with his disagreements and try to present what we believe is a biblical perspective on abortion and why we disagree with his position as well. And he says here, going on, yet more importantly, I disagree with how they go about protesting. The second argument is what I would encourage readers who disagree with my political opinions to point their eyes towards. So, again, it's not just his philosophical or political position per se, but it's actually what we're doing, why we're out in front of a community center, and why he disagrees with that. Okay, so moving on here. He says specifically, I hope this is legible, I disagree with pro-life stance for a variety of reasons, both philosophical and practical. Philosophically, I find granting moral consideration to a fetus highly problematic, as it is likely based on, or even is, a fallacy. What I mean by this is that if you are to say a fetus deserves to live because it is a member of the Homo sapiens species, you are deriving an ought claim, a fetus has a right to life, that is, from an is statement, that is to say, a fetus is a member of the Homo sapiens species. This is faulty because there is no justification for why a fetus' life is valuable. Okay, so Andrew here is making a philosophical argument. I think it's really important that we better understand the building blocks, or at least as I understand it, of philosophy. So first you have metaphysics. Metaphysics is one theory of reality, of existence, of being, what we are, who we are, where we are, what is, those sorts of things. Secondly, you have epistemology, which is one's theory of knowledge, how we come to know what we know. So as we exist in this reality, this existence, we observe and obtain knowledge and grow in that knowledge over time. And then thirdly, value theory. Value theory is what one values, how one develops meaningfulness in life, how one navigates this world in terms of moral and ethical oughts, what they ought and ought not to do. So again, that's metaphysics, one's theory of being, existence, reality, epistemology, how we know what we know, and value theory, simply put, how we should live our lives. So with that said, every philosophy, as I understand it, comes with a certain set of presuppositions. If I could use Christian philosopher Greg Bahnsen's definition here, I think it will be very helpful in trying to understand what Andrew is trying to get across to us here. It says, Bahnsen says, worldview is a network of presuppositions that are not tested by natural science, and in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. I'll repeat that again. So a worldview is a network of presuppositions that are not tested by natural science, and in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. So really, when one is developing a philosophy, whether critically or uncritically, everyone does it. When one does that, they're relying upon certain fundamental, untested understandings of reality that are not based in natural science. And it's in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. And so why do I share that? Well, what one believes about reality, metaphysically speaking, directly relates and is and affects one's interpretation of how they arrive at certain conclusions, how they come to certain knowledge, come to a knowledge. And also, to your value theory is informed both by what you believe metaphysically and also what you believe epistemologically. So in a sense, to try to simply put this, your no matter what you're claiming or what you're sharing, whether that be a value theory, a theory of reality, or some knowledge claim, your metaphysic and your value theory and all vice versa must correspond to such. So, for instance, Andrew here starts out with a moral claim. A moral consideration to a fetus is highly problematic, as it is likely even based on a fallacy. Okay, so there are two things that he's saying here. One, we have to take morality, his value theory, into consideration. Now, that value theory is going to come with metaphysical and epistemological presuppositions. He has certain beliefs about reality and certain beliefs about how he has come to that knowledge based on the value claim he's making here. And I really want to point this out. I think it's really important. as we work through this. What he's saying is, he says, quoting him again, moving on, what I mean by this is that if you're to say a fetus deserves to live because it is a member of the Homo sapiens species, you are deriving an ought claim. A fetus, that is, has a right to life. From an is statement, a fetus is a member of the Homo sapiens species. This is faulty because there is no justification for why a fetus's life is valuable. Okay, I want to pause there because I believe the rest of this article hinges upon this statement. Okay, one, what moral consideration is he making? He's saying one cannot derive an ought from an is. We would all agree that's a philosophical fallacy. He's right. So we need to be very careful in what we're saying about reality. Now, what is he saying about reality? He's saying that people are Homo sapiens species. What metaphysical reality is he speaking of? Well, he has a presupposition that is at play here that really needs to be pointed out. One, he is saying that people are a species, a biotic species. He's saying here, using Darwinian language, that we are a species of an animal. We are part of the animal kingdom. We are part of a grouping of other species and distinctly different as Homo sapien. Okay, so that is a metaphysical claim that he is making about what people are. That is an unbiblical metaphysical claim. So we don't call people Homo sapien species. We call them the race of mankind. All mankind is one race. We are not a species per se. We are not to be associated with the animal kingdom or anything else for that matter within the created order. We are distinctly different from the created order. So when we think of people, we don't usually call them Homo sapiens species. That is a categorization that has a philosophical underpinning of Darwinian evolution. A categorization that comes directly from Darwinian philosophy, his outlook on reality. So we need to recognize that right away. We do not acknowledge as Christians, or at least we shouldn't, this sort of categorization of people. We are image bearers of God. We are created in God's image and likeness. And again, there are many debates on what that is, but the Genesis chapter 1 is very explicit that we have been made, both male and female, in God's image. We bear his image. And with that, we have one human race. Paul says this in Acts 17, that there is but one human race, whether there be tongue, tribe, and nation differentiations. Categorically speaking, there's only one human race. We are not a species. We are a race of people. And so I think that's very important when we begin to move through this argument. Secondly, in terms of fetus, okay, fetus is a Latin term for developing child. So we can go to any medical dictionary, especially the older ones. The newer ones tend to be more politically influenced than the older ones do. But Latin term for fetus is developing child, nothing less. So if you have a zygote, a fetus, an embryo, whatever, you hear those quotes, embryo, zygote, fetus, those are all various stages of a developing child, okay? And so what he's saying here is a fetus has a right to life because a fetus is a member of the Homo sapiens species. He's saying that's what our argument is. It's faulty because there's no justification for why a fetus's life is valuable. Now that would be true in his understanding of reality, based on his metaphysical underpinning, his presuppositions that he has bought into, that he believes. Okay, this is a faith claim that we are Homo sapiens species. We are merely is, right? A Homo sapiens is what you are. You cannot then derive an ought claim for what you ought to do with this Homo sapien simply from that claim to what it is. So rights to life, in his view, are independent. They are not directly linked, what we would say innately or inherently, to a person, and in his view, Homo sapien. They are given externally at some later point. That is the center of all pro-choice argumentation. They distinguish the two. They have the value theory that is independent and ascribed at some later time, and the biblical metaphysic, the biblical value theory, which gets its knowledge claim from Scripture, by the way, not from empirical observing science, not from natural science, from mere observation of reality, but gets its epistemological claim, its knowledge claim from Scripture, God's very word, that says we are a unique creature made in God's image, which has an innate, divinely imputed value inherent in all human creatures from every stage. And we can even use one of our congregants, Macy. She shared something which I believe was very profound to help better understand the biblical argument. We would say that no different from an acorn growing into an oak tree, that acorn bears all the necessary information at the acorn level, no different from the human egg and the sperm when joined together, that whether growing in the ground and germinating or conceived in the womb and growing and developing, both have the intended purpose, the end, the information that is present at its core. I guess that's a better way of saying it, its core foundation, most rudimentary level, that both are intended to become something. One is intended to become a person, and the other is intended to become an oak tree. An acorn does not become a person, and a person does not become an oak tree. They have inscribed information at the very core level of what they are, with an intention of becoming what they were designed to be. Okay, and so we find that in Genesis chapter 1, trees bearing fruits and seed after its own kind, animals bearing after their own kind, and so on and so forth. And so we would have to divorce ourselves from facts, from reality around us, observable reality, as far as that's to say that animals and fruit-bearing trees and seed-bearing trees and plants and so on do not bear after their own kind. As a matter of fact, I'm a gardener. I love my garden, and I intentionally pluck the seeds of the plants that I like, knowing that it will produce not an exact, but a unique outcome of its original parent. Okay, so the parents produce a unique production. The plant is not the exact same thing as their parent plant was. The tree is not the same exact tree as their parent tree, but it is a derivative. It is a production in its likeness, one in one. It'll always be categorically an acorn turning into an oak tree, and it will always be categorically a person at the most basic level, seed and an egg. Once fertilized and conceived, conception occurs, become a human. So we have to better understand the two metaphysical approaches that we're taking here. I will take a biblical metaphysical approach. My knowledge comes directly from supernatural revelation. I believe that there is a necessity an epistemological necessity for supernatural revelation, for us to understand metaphysically what we are observing in order to rightly categorize it and to rightly navigate it, and also to rightly live in it. That's where my oughts come from. So my question to Andrew and those who follow in his line of thinking would be, since we cannot derive an ought from an is, we must ask Andrew where he derives his oughts from. He has some claim to knowledge. He has some value theory that he is proposing here. And so I would suggest here, if anyone is falling into any sort of fallacy, he has no foundation to stand on if he believes that we are all merely matter in motion, that we are biological bags of goo, if you will, highly developed ones, if you could even use that terminology in their metaphysical perspective, and that value theory is really meaningless in a incoherent, chaotic existence that is indifferent to us, where nothing was before us nor after us. And so one would have to fight an uphill battle trying to claim anything is an ought from his perspective. We have justification based on our views. I'm not sure where he justifies his, so I'm glad he brought that up. So moving on here. Okay, so now that we have his philosophical argument out of the way, and we have defined our terms, and we better understand the two positions that we are approaching here. I'm coming from the biblical worldview. He's coming from the assumption as a naturalistic, monistic perspective of reality where there is no creator. He believes in some atheistic or agnostic position, unaware of our origins, So his metaphysical claims are merely based on observation. He goes with the Darwinian theory of species instead of a human race made in God's image. He also sees a distinction between the value of personhood and the actual being itself. So he's saying that the being as an is separated from the ought claim, a right to life of some sort that should be given after the fact or at some arbitrary point, where we are saying biblically that a child has a right to life because intrinsically, innately, they have been given that value by their creator. It's divinely imputed upon them, and it's not to be diminished or removed or discarded. And so we don't have the right to impute this value or change this value after the fact. The moment we do, we begin to run into all sorts of moral and ethical problems. So with that said, we'll move on. This is ultimately relevant because if we're to take a hypothetical scenario where we find a creature who has all the capabilities and functions of a human but is biologically different from a human being, to use a pop culture reference, Yoda, Superman, your favorite X-Men, huge Star Wars fan, you would be unable to justify why they have a right to live. That's an interesting argument. Okay, let's go on. If those characters were real, though, we would hopefully agree that it would be wrong to simply murder those beings on the spot. All of this reveals an underlying flaw in the logic behind the idea that humans have a right to life simply because they are Homo sapiens. Okay, that's really interesting, Andrew. I would thank you for that, by the way. We are in 100% agreement there. We would never say from a biblical worldview that it would be acceptable to just wipe someone out because they are not of a certain species. Now, I don't know how you say that, in the sense of, I don't know how you don't make the argument that it would be perfectly justified to preserve the life of Homo sapiens and wipe out Yoda, right? Wipe out Superman or your favorite X-Man, right? So we have, the at the earliest stages of development, right? We have Grogu here, right? Baby Yoda, as people know him. Would it have been acceptable to wipe out Grogu while he was still, a pod or whatever he was when he first started developing? As I understand it, Grogu is some hundreds, if not 1,000 years old, right? But he is still in the early stages of development. What if he was just a small organism in his mother, or just an egg or something like that? We would say, yeah, of course, like, it's not acceptable. Now, we don't base the valuation. I think it's important here to recognize, we don't base the valuation of someone. We don't call someone a person because of their capabilities and functions, right? Because they function or have capacities like humans, but are biologically different, would never give us a right to just wipe them off the face of the earth. Okay, so let me use your hypothetical against you. Okay, so capabilities and functions don't determine the value of a person. This is where you start to run into problems, Andrew, philosophically. This is where I believe you fall into a moral and ethical slippery slope. And this is the same justification people used, for instance, Nazi Germany, to wipe people off the face of the earth. Millions and millions of people have lost their lives because of this sort of logical argumentation, this rationality. Here's why. If we relegate capabilities and functions down to it, and I know you're going to go on to talk about subjective experience and consciousness, even so, if we relegate it to those arbitrary terms, since you have no universal foundation to stand upon, what you're going to suggest is this is merely a consensus. You would have to agree with that, because not everybody agrees that these should be things that cause the value of a person. Anyway, my point being is, if we base it on capability and function, we would easily be able to say the elderly, those with special needs, should not have a right to life. To use your argument, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly. It would be totally wrong to murder those people on the spot because they lack the functionality or the capability of a Homo sapien, to use your terminology. Okay, what we are saying goes beyond what you're saying. We're saying because of the inherent value of a person, despite their capabilities and functions, whether or not they're able to do that. So if they're a special needs person, an elderly person who is bedridden, or someone who's injured themselves, something along those lines, that they don't lack any more dignity than we do. They have the same dignity because inherently they are valuable to their creator, enough that he had made them in his image. And so, again, we don't distinguish nor we don't believe it's up to us to give value to a person, especially when it comes to capability or function. So I do appreciate your point that you made here. And yes, of course, I hope you too would see that a person in their earliest stages of development, not having the capability and functions that we might, that you would never want to murder them on the spot either, right? Even if they're still in the womb. Okay, now I'd love to hear your response to that. So he goes on to say here, a better justification for moral consideration for humans is based on a subjective experience or consciousness. Now, again, this is a value claim being made here on how we should value human life. It comes from a presupposition that reality is a particular way. He's making a knowledge claim here. This is tied to a knowledge claim. How does this man know that a better justification for a moral consideration for humans should be based on an experience of consciousness? He goes on to share that. He says humans should have a right to life based on their consciousness and subjective experience in life. Why? And he says, well, to quickly refute the Ben Shapiro-esque arguments of anesthesia and comas, meaning there are people who are under anesthesia in surgical operations and so on, are completely out of it, okay? They're disconnected. They're asleep. They're passed out. And those in comas, same way. And as research from both volume 129 and 1 of Anesthesiology, which is a college textbook for prospective anesthesiologists, and the academic journal, the National Library of Medicine, find that in both of these cases, humans have a level of sentience. Okay, so sentience is another qualifier. Sentience is just sense experience, an issue of consciousness. Now, if you believe in a materialistic only universe, right, a matter only, monism, okay, a monistic existence, all is mere matter in motion, you're going to really struggle to try to even begin to justify the idea of consciousness. The idea is scientia, which is, in Latin, with knowledge. You are with knowledge in the most basic level. You are a mind thinking, and a mind which appeals to the external world. Okay, and so you now run into the problem of minds. If you, again, are believe in a monistic matter, material only universe, you're going to have a really tough time trying to justify mind, which extends beyond the material universe and accesses something beyond the material universe, things like numbers, logic, the laws of logic, whether you want to call them that or not. And again, some form of morality, some idea of rightness and wrongness, that there's an experience, a sensation. So it's not merely relegated to the senses only, but is consciously experienced. Okay? That's what sentience is. Now, you also go on to say, additionally, that people already have existing social contracts. And this is interesting. I love how you go around the arguments, right, that they haven't had experiences in their lives. You're saying that developmental social connections and previous desires to live, fetuses lack, since fetuses lack consciousness until the very late term of pregnancy. Now, what you're saying is that fetuses lack this because they're unconscious? Okay, well, is that an observable fact? I disagree. And I know it's scientifically invalid, despite whether one, if you want to say, well, they're conscious now at this particular time frame, that's going to be arbitrary because you're linking their value to some social contract and develop social connection and a desire to live. Now, if I might argue, don't they demonstrate a desire to live all the way up until birth through the entire course of their development? They sure do, and they're an independent, unique life. We all know that. That's a scientific fact. Down from the very beginning of conception, I just shared it a moment earlier, they're a unique life. They're a unique life. They are dependent upon their mother, yes, but they have a desire to live. Why? Well, because they're developing. If they didn't have a desire to live, they would die. They just would. And so if you want to make them some sort of meat machine, then you're going to have a problem with who their programmer was. What programmed them to have a desire? Is it a desire within them? That's debatable. But I don't think that you get to make that determination for their ultimate value simply because They lack some desire to live, their fight for survival. And that, by the way, goes entirely against any Darwinian understanding of the survival of the species, the survival of the fittest. Cutting off a life that is developing goes completely against that. You might call it natural selection. I call that foolishness. Also, develop social connections and existing social contracts. But what about special needs folks, right? Folks who are really struggling, who've always struggled from the moment they were born. They're, what perceivably incoherent. They're not connection to you. They kind of just wobble back and forth, and they don't really respond to you. They're just, out of it. And you would say, well, they don't have existing social contracts or develop social connections. But what about the people who have it with them? Don't the parents have some sort of social contract with the child? I mean, to use your language later, you say that someone had to consent to having a child, right? Well, that's a social contract. And you made it with the child as much as you've made it with the person that you decided to have sex with. The social contract exists with the person. It could be unilateral. The parents can have a contract with their unborn child. I know I did with mine, and I definitely developed social connections with them while they were developing. It's a matter of fact that children can hear music. They can hear the voices of their parents. They can be stressed out in the womb because their parents are experiencing a stressful situation, so on and so forth. And you can go on and on. That is an observable reality. So you'd have to deny those things and then somehow distinguish them from social contracts and social connections in a way that would make it unrecognizable, I think, unmeaningful. I think that's a better way of putting it. So going on here, you mentioned this idea of a bodily integrity argument, okay? You say that the fact that consenting to sex cannot be equated with consenting to a pregnancy. Well, right there, man, like that is a social contract. That you're making with, you want to call it a fetus, a homo sapien, or a person inside the body. You've made that equally with them. Why? Because you say that the risks by virtue of undertaking that action, let me say pregnancy, you know and are aware that that is a potential outcome. So let's talk about that real quick. There is an entire bodily integrity argument, the fact that consenting to sex cannot be equated with consenting to pregnancy. Just let me inform you, the moment you have sex with someone, you are consenting to pregnancy, whether that be the woman recognizing that this is a potential outcome or not. So this is a moral argument that you're making, saying that can be somehow distinguished based on your worldview. You're making a moral value to say, I get to choose to enjoy the pleasures of sex without having to face the consequences of sex, which is the potential of getting the person pregnant or becoming pregnant, right? That's a childish argument. That's called avoiding responsibility. You're developing a philosophical position, by the way, bankrupt, completely foundationless, as we've discovered so far, in order to say it's completely acceptable to avoid the responsibilities of the potential outcome of having sex with someone, which is the possibility of being pregnant and having a child. So let's move on. That previous argument is entirely philosophical, okay? Now, there is a much simpler practical argument to be made. Awesome. Let's hear your practical argument. Multiple studies, including a particular study from the Guttmacher, I think that's how you pronounce it, the Guttmacher Institute, found that in pre-Roe America, abortion was the leading cause of maternal mortality and remains the leading cause in many developing nations where safe abortion is not easily accessible. Simply put, legal abortions save lives. How's that for pro-life? That's not pro-life. Basically what you're saying. So that might be philosophically consistent with your position. But let's think about that. That is a philosophical argument based on, again, a metaphysic that believes that we've somehow gradually developed over billions of years. We are simply biological organisms that have some sentience, sense experience, consciousness, which I don't know how you justify those things, and have an understanding of morality, that we believe that we should live a certain way in this indifferent experience, indifferent existence, that somehow you hold a virtuous position for killing off what is developing in a mother's womb because it would be safer for the mother or father that desire to have an abortion. Let me kill off a person in order to save a person. Let me make murdering someone, this is what the biblical worldview believes, let me make murdering someone more safe and clinical so that we can at least protect the murderer and those who are helping them in the cause. Kill the child, destroy them, tear them apart in their mother's womb so that it's more accessible and easier done. And so that saves lives. That's mind-blowing. That doesn't make any sense at all. At all. And then here you go on. The sad truth, though, is that while the arguments I made are certainly compelling from a logical standpoint, they are unlikely to change people's minds. According to a study from Yale, unless individuals are highly motivated and committed to an analytical evaluation of the argument, emotional arguments and appeals to individuals' personal identity are much more convincing. And this is why my second issue with the Hybel protesters comes into play. So I agree with you, actually, Andrew. I think there's a lot of validity to what you're saying here. My charge to you, though, is I believe you're doing the exact thing that you're projecting on us. I've definitely demonstrated a philosophically rigorous evaluation of your arguments, a breakdown, and I can show and demonstrate the fallacies, the inconsistencies, the incoherence in your philosophy and the arguments that you're making from them. Your essential presuppositions, how they conflict with one another, how they can't make sense of our experience in this world. I think I've done that very carefully. So if anyone's not listening, it would be you. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure that I've ever interviewed you out on the street corner. I know that your buddy who took the pictures wouldn't even have a conversation with us. He was just laughing at us. He thought what we're doing is funny. And we asked him, I can even show you the video, we asked him to come over and have a conversation with us, and he wouldn't. So I don't believe that anything that you've shared is compelling, and I don't believe it's logical. And even appealing to something like logic and demanding something be compelling demonstrates that we need to speak truthfully about reality, about the world that we live in. And what I'm interested in knowing is how you justify that from a monistic perspective of reality. One who believes that we are part of a mere material world, fighting for our existence and survival, justifying the murder of your offspring in order to have pleasure and to not be responsible, and at the same time saying that that is a virtuously good thing because values are ascribed to individuals by a consensus of these biological bags of goo who decide what is the good, when we know goodness or moral oughts do not come from what is somehow saying that you are supposed to tell truth about reality and make sense of your reasoning. That's nonsensical, my friend. So I would encourage you, and I hope you are highly motivated and you are committed to an analytical evaluation of my arguments. And don't appeal to emotion. Don't appeal to an individual's personal identity. Please don't do those things. I beg of you. I'm asking you to be consistent. So let's move on. The protesters are not seriously committed to their beliefs. I can make this assertion because from simple observation, it becomes clear that these protests are not committed towards any form of systemic change. If these protesters truly believed infants were getting murdered, why on earth would they be out in the middle of a residential area that is 3 miles away from the nearest abortion clinic? Fantastic question, Andrew. We ask the same thing. We say, hey, if Christians really did believe this, if they really held to biblical convictions, if they did believe what scriptures teach about what the Bible says about children being a gift from God and how God hates the hands that shed innocent blood, and that children are unique individuals at the point of conception, that God has created them and knit them in their mother's wombs, that taking the life of a child for selfish reasons, for immoral reasons, for irrational reasons, should be punishable. And we believe biblically punishable by death. It's murder. Then why aren't more people outraged by it and engaging with it. So we definitely are at the abortion clinic weekly. We're out there in front of it, pleading with women to keep their children, pleading with men to provide for their households, pleading with people to stop having sex outside of marriage, pleading with people to uphold the beauty of the covenant of marriage, and prepared to help them financially when people are in a point of desperation and they see no other way. They think there's no other avenue. We're there to help physically with food and diapers and whatever else they might need in order to overcome that obstacle in their mind. We're there to help even adopt children. We are part of a network and organization that does this internationally, Andrew. And so how can you say we're not seriously committed to our beliefs? Maybe other folks are who share our ideas, kind of. They have a certain sentiment towards it, but they're not, to your point, they're not moving. Their actions betray their ideas. Their action betrays their words. And so we're with you on that. We believe that more people should be. And by the way, the reason we are committed to systemic change, by the way, because we do, we meet with people downtown. We have this media channel. This media channel is an actually product of that commitment towards systemic change. But the reason we come to you out in front of a residential area that's 3 miles away at a college campus, let's add that in there, is because who are the number one demographic, Andrew, for abortions? You know, the number one demographic for abortions is college students. Most Planned Parenthoods, and you can just check the statistics yourself, they strategically place themselves close by a college campus for that very reason. It is their number one business. So, with that said, who better to have a conversation with? Since, by the way, Planned Parenthood also strategically placed themselves about 400 yards away from the nearest public space where we can actually have conversations with people. And because we can't do that out in front, we'd be arrested. We get in trouble for moving off public property onto private property to try to have conversations with these people, these parents that are killing their children. We come to you. We come directly to you. So I think that demonstrates a pretty staunch belief in commitment to our beliefs and a commitment towards systemic change. Much more than a person who just monologues in an opinion article instead of having this conversation with people in person. I think so. So let's move on. If you wanted to, he says, if you wanted to change somebody's mind, why would you camp outside where they live every day for 3 hours with signs accusing those very same people of being supportive of murder? Because that's what they are, Andrew. You have a demographic that is the number one contributor to abortions. As we shared earlier, we believe abortion is murder. We believe abortion is murder because children are made in God's image. They are a gift from God. And it's not left up to us to purge them from society, to kill off our progeny, to destroy our heritage, which is a gift from God. Okay? And you're saying it doesn't seem like the most persuasive strategy. Well, if that were true, Andrew, why'd you write this article? And why are we having a meeting with the radio journalism student tomorrow morning to have a discussion from your school on the very same issue, which I am really eager to see what that turns out like. Okay, so if it's not persuasive, then share with us what you think that we could do better in order to encourage more students to consider our position. The answer is they don't actually care. We don't care. Is that true? It's not about saving lives or changing minds, you say. It's about feeling heard. Take your anger out at a system that has either moved on or neglected you. Is that true, Andrew? So it's not about being heard, as a matter of fact. It's about proclaiming the truth. It's about standing firm in that truth. It's about telling people that what they're doing is wicked. It's evil to kill your children, Andrew. That's why we do it. I'm not taking any sort of anger out on a system that has moved on or neglected me. Honestly, I don't care. That system will be destroyed by the Lord Jesus Christ. It'll ultimately be brought underneath his feet, and it'll be done by the foolishness of the gospel preached. So we stand out there full and well knowing that it's his work, it's not ours, and we're standing for a minute. And the interesting thing is, Andrew, he's angry. It says God hates the hands that shed innocent blood. He's angry at sin every single day and is working to destroy it. And he began that work on the cross. It says in 1 John that Christ came for the very purpose to destroy sin, to destroy lawlessness, to destroy the works of the devil, of Satan. And you're part of that. So you don't have to be worried about me. I don't care. Honestly, I really don't. At the end of the day, it makes me sad that you kill your children and that you would promote such a wicked culture of death, a culture that cannot sustain itself. Any culture that kills off its own heritage, its own legacy, will not survive. Any culture that decides that they get to change the value of personhood, that they get to make up sexual relationships, and that they get to have promiscuous sex outside of the covenant of marriage and then try to build a culture of that, they just won't stand. You don't fight against man, you fight against God, my friend. And so that's what you need to be aware of. So it says, to the sexists and racists who have become largely delegitimized in our media, I have only one thing to say: cope. As for those who are unheard and are lashing out, that is an anger that we students at Colorado College must address and work towards. The best way of doing that is economic policy and social change that relieves the anger of those protesters. So I suppose now you're lumping us in with sexists and racists. And we're the ones who are delegitimized in our media. Okay, so again, this is all based on a philosophical understanding that what our media is producing in general is legitimate, right? So we're delegitimized. We're not given a legitimate platform from a group of people who produce and they discriminate on what is true and what is not. And you're saying that the end product that the media, and when you say media, I imagine the general media, you're saying from TV to social media out platforms and so on, all of these are speaking about legitimate issues, and they're rightly discriminating and censoring out that which deservedly so needs to be. Things like sexism and racism. So we would both be on the same page, actually. I'm not a sexist. Matter of fact, I actually have a value system, a fundamental value system that exalts the beauty of both sexes, male and female. Okay, it's not sexist. That's rightly categorizing and speaking truthfully about reality. There's only male and female, and they were designed for a particular relationship structure within the covenant of marriage before God. And they're to be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over all the earth. Okay, and so the moment you decide to abandon that, you get to make up your own value. I'm not the image bearer of God. I disavow these relationship structures. I do not care. I get to determine my own reality. I get to come up with whatever sex I want to be. I get to have sex with whoever I want to have. And by the way, if a product if pregnancy is a product of that, I get to eliminate that. And then I get to try to build an entire culture around that. Who deserves to be delegitimized? A culture of death should be delegitimized. So is the media neutral, Andrew? Are you neutral? I don't think so. I think you've assumed our intent. You've tried to discern the desires of our heart and what we're committed towards. You began to assume what we believe without even having a conversation with us. And you, as a media producer, have produced a lie about your neighbor who you say supposedly need to work towards growing in a stronger relationship with economically and socially. So interesting enough, Andrew, how that works out, right? That is interesting. So finally, you say, all in all, those protests are frustrating. Well, I imagine they are. They should be. When you're called a murderer and those who support murder, killing off of children in the womb, I imagine that is pretty frustrating. And I imagine it's even more so frustrating when you can't rationally defend it, philosophically defend it, morally defend it. You have no grounding at all. And you're angry because you know that it's wrong. Deep down inside, whether you want to admit that or not, all of this opinion that you've shared here today, which is just really your venting, is why you should be delegitimized, why you shouldn't have a platform, why those, if they were really looking at this article, should ignore you. They should. And it's sad that more people agree with you than not. So when all those protests are frustrating, they're based on illegitimate reasons, and it would be disrespectful to refer to them as a form of civil disobedience. as their actions have clearly shown that they are not committed towards tangible change. Interesting. So in the beginning of this article, you had mentioned that what we are doing is legal. We actually have a right, just the same way you have a right here to write your opinions. We have a right to share ours on a college campus. You're sharing yours on a college campus about the same exact subject we are, and you are entirely within your legal rights. Where have we committed ourselves to civil disobedience, Andrew? And by the way, affirming that civil disobedience, while committed towards a tangible change, is okay, would you agree that in order to have a basis for a legitimate reason to do so, must come from some foundation that allows for that, meaning a moral ought that legitimizes a tangible reason to be committed towards civil disobedience that moves you towards that? So we have that. As Christians, we have that. We can say, this is in defiance to God's divine word, his law word. He has called our civil magistrates to uphold justice for all. Matter of fact, they're going to give an account for that to their Creator, and that we have an obligation to do what's in the best interest of all living creatures, those who bear, especially those who bear God's image. And as a result, we need to move towards laws and legislation and changes, and we're asking civil magistrates to demonstrate some civil disobedience at some point to protect the lives of the unborn. We're asking for civil magistrates to intervene. The word is interpose, right? We're saying civil magistrates, for instance, the mayor, county sheriff, police officers, and judges and others who have this responsibility to uphold justice in our society. You should be committed towards a tangible change based on the fundamental principles that Scripture convey about the basic values of people, that the value of personhood comes from God, and it is not to be arbitrarily decided by a consensus of people, especially those who are rebelling against God and his created order. So you say, yet underneath all of that, those people are our neighbors. Am I your neighbor, Andrew? You believe that? Then let's have a conversation. And let's figure out a way to address the growing discontent that these people, including you, feel. Why are you so frustrated? You shouldn't be. Matter of fact, if you really were consistent with what you believed, you wouldn't be at all. As a matter of fact, you wouldn't have even written this article. It would be just something you laughed at, mocked, and ignored, like most of your friends do out on the campus. With that said, let's just conclude here. Welcome to Colorado College. It says here, and I read this to students as they walk by us out there. It says, welcome to a vibrant community, a community of around 2,000 students eager to communicate, debate, defend, and engage. The conversations don't stop when you leave the classroom, Andrew, but they expand in every corner of the campus as friends and peers, these people, like us, relentlessly urge you to think outside the box, prosper, and expand your views. So I leave you with that, my friend. I'm not sure that that's something that you're interested in doing. I think that's the reason why you have chosen the platform to monologue your opinion instead of actually engage critically with it in person, which is much more respectful than lying about people. It's a cowardly thing, what you've done. And I really hope that we have the opportunity in the future to speak on the issue more. So I'm really looking forward, like I said, to this radio journalist student who we're meeting with tomorrow, who's going to be interviewing us, who actually attended our church on Sunday from CC. And we will be interviewing him as well. We'll be videoing it. And hopefully what we see as a result of this interview, as a result of this meeting, is that we find students on Colorado campus that really fit this community standard here presented on the welcome page at Colorado College. Because I also let you know this, I plan on doing a compilation that I'd like to give to your dean of students and other faculty members there to really demonstrate that this college is not producing the kind of people that it's saying to the community it is. And I'm really hoping that changes, Andrew. I'm really thankful that Andrew took the time to share his thoughts and opinions. Of course, we would have loved to have heard from him directly on the matter. And I'm really hoping that this time spent here really shows and demonstrates the potency of the Christian worldview. That we really are, as Jesus said, building our house on the rock, not on the sand. That when push comes to shove, when someone tries to stand in a bankrupt, illogical, incoherent, philosophical system, and then condescendingly pat you on the head, saying that what you believe is absolutely ridiculous, so much to the point where, you know what, if we just made some economic and social changes, these people would feel like they're more heard, and they wouldn't be as angry anymore. Really, what they're saying is you just need to be better educated, and you need to grow up, and maybe one day you'll be like us. So what I'm hoping to show and demonstrate that as Christians, we truly do hold to in Christ the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Wisdom being a knowledge rightly applied in God's created order, to rightly speak and categorize things within God's created order, which we were designed for. That was the purpose we were designed for. And to speak rightly about it, to speak rightly about God, His creation, ourselves, one another, our relationships, and those things. And the issue of abortion is just one of many of those things that need to be addressed. And so what I hope that this does is encourages you as Christians to go dig deeper into the scriptures, look at Genesis 1-3, look at exactly how often the creator-creature relationship is acknowledged, referenced throughout scripture. What does it mean to be an image bearer of God? What does that mean for us now? What does it mean to be in Christ? And how does that directly relate and correspond to the issue of abortion? And what should we be doing to stop it? What should we be doing to work against it, to stand firm as a gospel issue in our city? Hey, thanks for joining us today, and keep your eyes out for future interviews. We will be doing an interview, like I said, tomorrow morning with a gentleman who is a radio journalist student from CC who is interested in the work that we're doing. And I'm really curious to see, based on that interview, which as I shared, we'll be filming it, and really seeing, okay, what are the kind of questions he asked? How do we answer those questions? And then how is that portrayed in the radio broadcast? I am very curious to see how that works out. I'm looking forward to seeing the weeks to come and what comes about it. And yeah, please share your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If there's issues that you'd like to see us address, if there's articles, particularly here within Colorado Springs, that you would like us to speak to, or folks you'd like us to meet with, we'd love to do that. We want to be more involved in our city on this issue. So, yep. Thanks so much again for joining us. God bless you guys.